What up, gang? So today we're back with a new one. This time it's on history. Post-Soviet Russia was insane. Crime Wonderland in the Wild 90s by Cosmic Click. Let's check it out. Let's see what he has to say.
The year is 1991. The red flag of the Soviet Union is lowered for the last time. After nearly 70 years, the mighty USSR, once feared and admired across the globe, crumbles into history. In its place rises a new nation, but instead of hope, there's fear. Russia is now a country without rules, a place where cash is king, crime is power, and survival is a daily gamble. In just a few months, millions of citizens lose their savings, their jobs, even their homes. And in the shadows, a new elite rises, men with gold watches, blacked out Mercedes, and blood on their hands. This isn't just post-Soviet Russia. This is the wild 1990s. When the Soviet Union collapsed, it didn't just lose its government. It lost its economy, its identity, and its future. For decades, the state had controlled everything: food, jobs, even rent. But now, everything was up for grabs. Factories stopped running.
Back in the day when we were being taught government in school, history, in high school, I used to think communism was a perfect concept. Like, why is everyone not trying it? I always like, it makes sense now. Share the state's resources across equal parties. Like, just share it to everybody equally. It turns out, as I've grown older, that I've realized that communism is not sustainable, and you'll figure out why soon in this video. But communism is not sustainable. Capitalism is what it's at, but the only thing is that if capitalism is not being checked, it might lead to ultra capitalism, which we have what is going on in UK, in the US, Canada, and these top countries, where the middle class is dying. So there's a major gap between the poor and the rich. Right? There's a major gap between the poor and the rich.
Everything was up for grabs. Factories stopped running. Workers stopped getting paid. Hyperinflation kicked in. Prices doubled, then tripled. A loaf of bread cost more in the evening than it did in the morning. Lifelong savings were gone overnight. And as ordinary Russians struggled to find food or fuel, a small group of men saw an opportunity to become untouchable. In 1992, inflation in Russia reached 2,500%.
Damn.
By 1994, 70 million people lived below the poverty line.
So 70 million people.
To jumpstart capitalism, the Russian government came up with a bold idea: give every citizen a voucher, a tiny piece of paper, that could be exchanged for shares in former state-owned companies, oil fields, steel factories, airlines, banks. The Soviet Empire was now for sale. The plan was meant to create a nation of shareholders, but most people had no idea what these vouchers were really worth. They sold them for groceries, vodka, or a few rubles in cash.
You really don't know what you have, the value of what you have till you lose it.
Meanwhile, a few clever and ruthlessest men began buying them up by the thousands. This wasn't just business, it was daylight robbery. Entire billion-dollar industries were snapped up for the price of a used car. By 1996, a handful of men, later known as oligarchs, controlled more wealth than entire Soviet ministries ever had. Here is an interesting fact. One man bought 40% of a major oil company for just $100,000. In just a few years, Russia had gone from communism to a gangster version of capitalism, where the rules didn't exist, and neither did the middle class.
So you see, that's the problem with capitalism. If capitalism is not being checked by the state, because the state still have the state still needs to decide how the wealth is being shared among these classes, these socio-economic classes of people, rich, middle class, and the poor. Right, or the A1, A2, B1, B2, if you want to go deeper into the market item side of it. If capitalism is not being checked by the state, it's going to be going worse. even though capitalism is what is ideal for every state, every government, every country. It's just basically what China is doing, right? The state still has the final say on how the wealth is still being controlled, even as the fact that they've given resources out to people to, create wealth for yourself, but we still have the final say of how we can check this so capitalism so that we don't reach this point of ultra capitalism, which is why China's economy is booming and is doing fantastically well as it is today, which is why this trade war between USA and China to me doesn't make sense. I feel like it's the people behind the IMF and stuff that are actually pushing Trump to actually do what he's doing now.
With no real government oversight, no functioning police force, and billions of rubles up for grabs, Russia in the 1990s became the perfect breeding ground for organized crime. If you opened a business, you didn't just pay taxes, you paid for protection. If you didn't, your windows were smashed, your family threatened, or worse, you'd vanish without a trace. Dozens of mafia groups ruled the streets, each with its own soldiers, assassins, and politicians in their pocket. Moscow became a battleground. Drive-by shootings, bombings, public assassinations, contract killings became so common, they had a nickname. Between 1992 and 1999, over 3,000 contract killings were reported in Russia. Many were never solved. Even the oligarchs had to pick sides. Some hired private armies, others made deals with mob bosses. In many cities, the line between businessman and criminal simply disappeared. Russia wasn't just being looted, it was being conquered, not by foreign powers, but by men with gold chains, leather jackets, and blood on their hands. While the oligarchs got rich and the mafias grew powerful, the average Russian was just trying to survive. Hospitals had no medicine, teachers weren't paid for months, entire neighborhoods relied on black markets just to find bread or diapers. Pensions vanished overnight. Families shared one apartment, sometimes with no heat or hot water. In the winter, people burned furniture to stay warm. In the summer, they sold everything they owned just to buy food. Alcoholism skyrocketed. So did suicide rates. Millions of men simply disappeared from the workforce, or from life itself. And yet, something strange happened. Amid the ruin, a new kind of freedom emerged. People started their own businesses, played rock music in underground clubs, and finally spoke their minds without fear of the KGB. It was a messy, raw, painful freedom, but it was real. For the first time, people could dream of something better, even if they had no idea how to get there. But those dreams often ended in blood, because behind the scenes, Russia was being carved up by gangs, ruthless, well-armed, and terrifyingly organized. At the top of the underworld sat the Solntsevskaya Bratva, based in Moscow, named after the Solntsevo district. They operated like a corporation, laundering money through banks, buying up restaurants and casinos, and partnering with international criminal networks from Italy to Israel. Their alleged boss, Sergei Mikhailov, known as Mikas, built a billion-dollar empire. He was seen in luxury resorts.
That's Mike. I don't even know how to I want to learn how to pronounce this Russian.
Mingling with politicians and oligarchs, protected by a web of bribes and fear. By the late 90s, Solntsevskaya had operations in 12 countries and
Solntsevskaya. I apologize to any Russian watching this. I apologize for butchering your language. Solntsevskaya. I need to learn how to speak Russian.
And over 9,000 members. In the 90s, Solntsevskaya had operations in 12 countries and over 9,000 members. In St. Petersburg, the Tambov gang, led by Vladimir Kumarin, took over fuel distribution, ports, and even parts of city government. They were known for their political ties, particularly during the early careers of certain city officials. In 2007, Kumarin was arrested and later convicted for racketeering and organizing murders. Investigators accused the Tambov gang of assassinating rivals and extorting fuel companies. Kumarin was known as the Night Governor of St. Petersburg. Unlike the more business-like Russian mobs, Chechen gangs struck fear through sheer violence. Known for kidnappings, bombings, and contract killings, they were feared by even the other mafia groups. In 1996, journalist Dmitry Kolodov, who investigated corruption and Chechen mafia ties in the army, was killed by a suitcase bomb placed in his newsroom. The case remains unsolved. The Chechen mafia was linked to hostage-taking during both Chechen wars. The most dangerous part? These gangs weren't separate from the state. They were connected through bribes, alliances, and influence. Some gangsters even ran for public office, and won. By the late 90s, it became impossible to tell where the mafia ended, and the government began. Russia was being run by both.
Somehow similar to what my country is like. It's even worse with the current incumbent. I don't want to, but with the current incumbent, you guys get the point. He controls everyone. The thugs.
Often in the same room, signing the same deals, protected by the same guns. By the end of the 1990s, the gunfire had faded, but the damage stayed. Russia was breathing, but barely. Her cities were littered with empty factories, broken families, and graves with no names. Heroin swept through the streets like a plague. Teenagers sold themselves for scraps, not because they wanted to, but because there was no other way. Stairwells became shooting galleries. Schools became ghost towns. Hope became currency, and most people couldn't afford it anymore. Freedom meant nothing when your stomach was empty. Democracy was just another promise that led to nothing. People didn't want slogans anymore. They wanted order. They wanted to stop waking up afraid. So when a quiet man from the KGB stepped forward, promising to restore pride, to punish the corrupt, to never ever go back to the chaos of the 90s, they didn't just listen, they obeyed. Because after a decade ruled by criminals and cowards, Russia was ready for a new kind of strongman.
It just makes sense because I've just been thinking on my country, like in retrospect on. I said for us to be better in the present or in the future, we need to actually know what the past mistakes we've done in the past. We need to know your history. I've forgotten what that quote is like, but that's just like the summary of what the quote is. We need a dictator in Nigeria, a dictator that is all about state prosperity first. He's going to do anything and everything to achieve that goal first, which is state prosperity first before any other thing. I will see you on the next one. Check out Cosmic League. See you. Bye.